First of all, congratulations on being able to have such a representation at the community event. I was at one event last week where every person in the room was a woman, and we were there to discuss some female issues, apart from one man, and I felt it was such a shame when we come together to talk about common issues that we want to improve in our communities. If you just have one section of the community, it's lovely to see such a range of age and background and ethnicity in the room, and I'm really grateful for the invite to be here today, so thank you for that. I wanted also to say what a wonderfully positive relationship that I feel that Constabulary in Suffolk has, the police has, with our different communities and yourselves in particular, and I hope that is a two-way feeling as well. We do feel that we can work with our Muslim community, and that we have our challenges, that you come to us with concerns and you raise issues with us, and likewise we can come to you when you need advice and guidance, and it really feels a very positive, two-way, healthy, mature relationship, and I really want to take this opportunity to say thank you for that, and please ask for that to continue and grow and mature even further. As you heard in the introduction, I spent 3.5 years, fairly recently, living in Turkey, and I went to Turkey in 2012 and lived in an apartment block with my 2 young children and family. We learnt a lot about the Islamic faith. We've made many Muslim friends out there. My children, in particular, learnt a lot about the Islamic faith. And it struck me once, I was just thinking about this as I was hearing the wonderful prayers. When we came back to England for the first time on holiday after 1 year, my youngest son was 5 years old, and he had some trouble sleeping, and he said to me, you know, I can't sleep here. The wonderful man with the nice voice doesn't sing to me at night time. And he was missing the prayers at night. And I think that's such a wonderful reflection of how he felt at home in Turkey, and we did have an amazing time there as a family. From Suffolk Police, we do have, as I hope you know, our safer neighbourhood teams. They do provide that engagement with the local communities, and we do what we can to try and challenge hate crime and any offences against any section of our community for whatever reason. Again, I want to take this chance to please ask you to raise these issues with us. We are there together. We are all from Suffolk. We all live here. I am a resident, you are residents, and we don't want to see anything and anyone being in any place being vulnerable or suffering because of their ethnicity, of their religion, or any particular reason. We can all do this together, and I wanted to just make sure you were aware of our safe neighbourhood teams and those in the community that are there to help. And finally, I just want to wish you well with your conference. I do hope that this is an opportunity for you to gain an opportunity to talk amongst the tables. I know that there's some interesting breakout sessions to look at particular issues, and I'm looking forward to seeing and hearing some of that debate and contributing my part to it. So, without saying anything more from me, thank you once more for this invitation, for the wonderful food, for the beautiful prayers, and I wish you well, and please, let's work together to make this a better place for us all to live. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Hopefully people can see me if I have the screen like this. Yeah? Thank you for the very generous introduction. So I'm going to perform the poem that we just talked about. And after I performed it, I'm also going to talk about a few of the themes that I raised in that poem, because I think they're quite important in terms of understanding perhaps the feelings and the place of Muslims in Britain today, at least from my point of view. So, to give you some context, I wrote this poem in June. So it was the middle of Ramadan, so the month when Muslims fast, for anyone who doesn't know. And I was living in London at that point, and the day that I wrote this poem was the day after the London Bridge attack. So That was the one where there was a van that was mounted onto the curb, crashed into people. The men got out of the car, went into Borough Market and stabbed people. So it was the day after that, and I had actually only found out about that attack the night before, where I, along with, I think probably 1,000 or more Muslims had been at Regent's Park Mosque, which is kind of one of the central mosques in London, and we've been praying there's some prayers that you do in the evening in Ramadan. So we'd all been in there, and I came out and I looked at my phone and I had this text from my mum, and it was like, don't know if you've seen the news, but be careful going home. And I think I had the feeling that many people in this room are familiar with, which was really heightened by the sense of where I had just been and the fact that it was Ramadan, and it was this feeling of, what a shame that I know that we have all been doing this very spiritual, very peaceful thing this evening, and yet tomorrow morning, nobody might know the difference between me and anybody else. And, maybe that's because of the media, maybe that's because of many things. I was writing this poem in that context, and hopefully I can explain it further once I've performed it. I hope everyone can see me. All right. Some poems force you to write them. The way sirens force their way through window panes in the night, and you can't shut out the news, even when you try. Write a humanizing poem. My pen and paper goad me. Show them how wrong their preconceptions are. Be relatable. Write something upbeat for a change. Crack a smile. Tell them how you also cry at the end of Toy Story 3. And you're just as capable of bantering about the weather in the post office queue. Like everyone, you have no idea how to cook the perfect amount of pasta. Still, feed them stories of stoic humour. Make a reference to childhood. Tell an anecdote about being frugal, mention the X Factor. Be domestic, successful, add layers. Tell them, you know brown boys who cry. About the sides of Assads, Amirs and Hassans, they don't know the complex inner worlds of Sumayyas and Aishas. Tell them comedies as well as tragedies. How full of life we are. How full of love. But no, I put my pen down. I will not let that poem force me to write it, because it is not the poem I want to write. It's the poem I have been reduced to. Reduced to proving my life is human because it is relatable. Valuable because it is recognizable. But good GCSEs, family and childhood memories are not the only things that count as a life. Living is. So this will not be a Muslims are like us poem. I refuse to be respectable. Instead, love us when we're lazy. Love us when we're poor. Love us in our back-to-backs, council estates, depressed, unwashed and weeping. Love us high as kites, unemployed, joyriding, time-wasting, failing at school. Love us filthy, without the right colour passports, without the right sounding English. Love us silent, unapologising, shopping in Poundland, skiving off school, homeless, unsure, sometimes violent. Love us when we aren't athletes, when we don't bake cakes, when we don't offer our homes or free taxi rides after the event, when we're wretched, suicidal, naked and contributing nothing. Love us then. Because if you need me to prove my humanity, I'm not the one that's not human. My mother texts me too after BBC News alerts. Are you safe? Let me know you're home okay. And she means safe from the incident, yes, but also from the after effects. So sometimes I wonder, which days of the week might I count as liberal, and which moments of forehead to the ground am I conservative? I wonder, when you buy bombs, is there a clear difference between the deadly ones that kill and the heroic ones which scatter democracy? I wonder, isn't it really guilty until proven innocent? How can we kill in the name of saving lives? How can we illegally detain in the name of maintaining the law? I can't write it. I put my pen away. I can't. I won't write it. Is this radical? Am I radical? Because there is nowhere else left to exist now. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk about some of the themes in that poem that I think are important, which is what I was asked to do here today. So I'm going to talk about three things. The first is the tendency to want to humanize yourself as a Muslim. So the first half of the poem, that's what I was doing, right? I was saying, this is the poem that I want to write. I want to say to people, look, we're just like you, we're ordinary, I also do everything that you do. And I think this is a tendency and a feeling that a lot of Muslims have, particularly after attacks, after violent events. And it's, I think, because we want to prove the majority of Muslims aren't like that. And I think the reason we want to do that is because the media is so saturated with negative images of Muslims that I believe, at least, that if I feel that those images aren't there, I also worry that other people believe that those realities don't exist. So, the negative images we see are men mainly as terrorists, extremists, and violent, and women as oppressed and victims and also extremists. But I don't think we ever see ourselves reflected really as in positive ways. And I think that leads to the worry then that no one does. But what happens, I think, when we try to do this distancing and this kind of, no, I'm a good Muslim, they're bad Muslims, that's a minority, the rest of us are good, is that I think we create these false categories. So we get the good and the bad Muslim. I think after 7/7, maybe it was Tony Blair, I'm not entirely sure, he said, we need the moderate Muslims to speak out. And I think you get these binaries of, moderate, extreme, conservative, liberal, traditional, modern. And I guess that's what I was talking about. There's that line in that poem where I say, which days of the week might I count as liberal and which moments of forehead to the ground am I conservative. And what I'm saying is that these categories are another way, I think, of reducing the kind of lives and the humanity of Muslim people. If you followed me around for a day, there are definitely moments of the day where you could say, oh, she's quite traditional, she's quite conservative, if I'm praying, if I go to the mosque. And there are other moments of the day where you might say, oh, she's quite liberal, she's quite modern, oh, she's wearing jeans, she's going to a feminist march. But the reality is that those boxes don't define Muslims, and I think when we force Muslims into those categories, we do dehumanize them. So, for example, after yesterday, what happened in Las Vegas, right? There was nobody saying, where are the moderate non-Muslims? Where are the white men who will come out and say that they don't stand for this, they don't condemn it? And I think the real issue is that in even suggesting that Muslims should condemn, we suggest that we have a right to question their humanity. And so that's what I really was grappling with in that first part of the poem, because I felt that pressure, I felt that need to say something, and then I realised this is something that is quite unique to Muslims, this pressure and this burden to represent. So that's the first bit. And then the second bit of the poem, I thought, where I start saying, lovers when we're lazy, lovers when we're poor, lovers in our back-to-backs, our council estates. What I'm talking about here, or what at least I'm trying to highlight, is that Muslims in Britain actually face a lot of social and economic problems, right? Along with many working-class, marginalised people and groups in this country. So a recent report came out last week, well, quite a lot of reports came out in the last few weeks, but one of them was talking about this in particular, and so 46%, so that's almost half, let's say, of Muslims in this country live in the 10% most deprived local authority areas. On top of that, I can't remember the exact statistic, but the disproportionality of Muslims who live below the poverty line as compared to kind of the rest of the population is really quite staggering. I wish I had that statistic. And then it's things like Muslims are 3 times as more likely to be unemployed than their counterparts. And the reason I'm highlighting these things, and the reason that I'm saying lovers when X, Y, Z, is that I do not believe the burden to kind of prove humanity should be on those who are socially neglected, right? I'm of the belief that if you live in a society where, for example, there's homelessness, you don't blame the homeless person for their homelessness. You say, what is it wrong with us as a society, as a state, as a political entity, that we do not provide housing for these people, that we do not have affordable housing, that we have austerity, that we have cuts, all these things, all these questions. So in the case of Muslims, I think we have to really ask questions of wider society. And what I'm saying when I'm saying love us when, is that the burden cannot just be on Muslims, right? The burden cannot just be on Muslims to rectify their position, to kind of deal with all the problems they're facing. It has to be a shared problem of society. Another interesting report that came out the other week was about, it was the David Lammy review, this was into prisons, and it found that 15% of the prison population in Britain is Muslim. Okay, less than 5% of Britain's population is Muslim. So that's obviously a huge disproportionality there. And for me, this should make us ask again, what is wrong with society, not what is wrong with Muslims innately. I mean, black Muslims will know this well, but so historically what's happened with the black community in America and the UK is that poverty, intergenerational poverty, discrimination, unemployment, these problems lead to petty crime, lead to violence, lead to criminality. But there's a really famous prison campaigner in America, Angela Davis, who said that prisons do not deal with social problems. They work to invisibilize social problems. So she said you lock up people so that then the state, the society, the government does not have to question or deal with the fact of poverty, the fact of, people feeling completely disenfranchised, people having to kind of find other outlets, which we then kind of criminalize them for. Basically what I'm trying to say here is that we need to kind of question the problems facing Muslims and kind of think about how they're not just on Muslims, yeah? A lot of people in this country are just trying to survive, a lot of marginalised, a lot of working class people, like I'm saying, a lot of racialised people, and I think the culpability and the accountability has to rest with society more broadly. And that leads to my third theme, which is the third part of the poem, where I start talking about what's the difference between a deadly bomb that kills people and a heroic one that scratches democracy. How can we kill in the name of saving lives? How can we illegally detain in the name of maintaining the law? What I'm talking about here is the contradictory logic, basically, that is used in the way we think about Muslims in Britain. So particular stories are told about Muslims that allow particular actions to be taken. And these actions are contradictory. So like I was saying with the bomb example, and people have highlighted this many, many times in recent years, there is a discrepancy in terms of when violence occurs in certain soils as opposed to when it occurs in other soils, and when it's perpetrated by this government abroad as opposed to when it's perpetrated by non-state actors, so individuals. I think a really good example about this kind of contradictory logic, which then justifies the whole of society not taking responsibility, is the case of terrorism. So I've been researching for the past year into a lot of the counter-terrorism legislation in this country. That's what my master's has been in. And I think what's really interesting is the idea that terrorism is caused by the radicalization of Muslims, right? That's the kind of premise. And so radicalization is something that happens to Muslims. So actually, for radicalization to happen, you have to be Muslim, generally. Okay, and I think that creates a situation then where any Muslim could be radicalized, right? And if any Muslim could be radicalized, all Muslims require surveillance. All Muslims are suspicious populations. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that is the situation we're kind of living with right now. You have things like prevent legislation, which I'm sure a lot of you know about, but really the case I would highlight today is Schedule 7. So this is the measure that allows anybody who's entering the UK to be detained, questioned or stopped without grounds of any reasonable suspicion. So a man called Mohammed Rabbani last week was charged under this. He was stopped as he came back into the country, and he was asked to unlock his phone. Now, he said that he couldn't unlock his phone because he has confidential information on there of a client who is a client that he works with who is a torture victim. And obviously, you can't broach confidentiality when you're in a job like that. He was arrested for not unlocking his phone, and last week he was found guilty under counter-terrorism legislation for not unlocking his phone. I think that's really important to think about, right? If you could be charged under counter-terrorism legislation for not unlocking your phone, does that tell us there's something flawed within that legislation? Does that tell us there's something flawed within our method and the way that we're looking and thinking about what causes violence? I think it does, because it suggests that we're working on the premise that violence is inherent and innate in Muslim brains, right? Something happens to Muslims that makes them violent. We're not thinking about the violence that causes violence, and by that I mean we're not thinking about the fact that, like as I've just described, if you criminalize a population, if you make them suspicious constantly, if you keep them in socio-economic deprivation, if on top of that you're violent overseas and at home, if you condemn them, if you negatively stereotype them in the media, in the press, and the government, I think there are grounds to start thinking about violence in a different way. When you expand that picture and you think about the rest of society and government's accountability. So, for me, it was just really important to highlight that sort of false idea and contradictions that are held up in the media. So the take-home message, what I've tried to talk about today is just that, one, I don't think Muslims should have to prove anything. Our humanity should not be questioned to start with. We don't have to, there's a really famous, Toni Morrison, who's a black woman from the US, has a really famous quote where she says that one of the main functions of racism is distraction. And I think actually one of the main functions of this kind of whole condemning industry, I guess, is distraction. We spend so long saying not all Muslims are like that we're not focusing on the problems Muslims are facing. The second thing was the socioeconomic problems, And the third thing was the problem of criminalizing and surveilling and keeping a population as forever suspicious. I think we really need to start moving and stop pointing the finger at Muslims, whether it's to condemn, whether it's to act, whether it's to sort of pull themselves up by their bootstraps. We really need to think about society and the state and what the role of everybody in this room, everybody, literally everybody, to do something. What it is the role of anybody in any institution in this country to kind of think about the violence that is probably inherent in their job too. Thank you very much for listening to me today.
I was engaged in local community work, and I found myself in prison on the other side of the bar, talking to prisoners and convincing them to come back to their senses and to rectify and to change their way of life. Now, human beings of all kinds face challenges of all sorts. And if we do an analysis of the problems facing Muslims, we will find that there are a lot of crossovers to other human beings or others who are not Muslims. And that's what we've heard from the previous speaker. We've heard many statistics and many reports that highlight this. And I think for Muslims, one of the things that really stands out to me, and having talked to the children that I just taught before I came here, and they talked to me, they were year sixes, they were the last year of primary school, and they talked about their challenges as Muslims in primary school. And I think we came to the conclusion as a class that it all boils down to education. And they reminded me about the importance of the Quranic command to be educated and to educate others. Well, the very first command, the Quranic command, is Iqra, is to read. And is to inquire, is to open the mind and to allow for information and knowledge to take place in the heart. Because knowledge is the very thing, if we look at all of the problems and we look at how we can eradicate all of these problems and face these challenges in a very productive way, we will find that we need to go to the grassroots and start to really educate and be inspired through this education. Allah the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this as a first command to the Messenger of Allah, to the Prophet of Allah, who was illiterate, could not read or write. But he was instructed just to repeat after the angel Gabriel. To repeat. Not to feel despondent, that I can't read and therefore I should not try. But that he should still repeat after the angel Gabriel.
إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمد رسول الله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I already heard my dad. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Well, I might as well get peace and blessings. So when you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, which is the very extended version of when Muslims greet each other, it's with peace, blessings and mercy. So I just thought if I gave peace, blessings and mercy, I should get not just peace back, but blessings and mercy as well. So I am going to talk very quickly because you're going to have the rest of the second half of the session with me facilitating tabletop activities where we're actually going to be discussing some of the themes that both Suhaima and Imam Bashir have spoken about. And I think it's really important to make sure that the themes of understanding, humanizing Muslims and understanding where we came from to know that where we're going, not just generations of our ancestors, but also just to understand that Islam is actually a fabric of Britain that didn't come with post-colonial travels over here because the Brits came over to the subcontinent or, raped and pillaged Africa and things. All that did happen. But it's really more about the fact that Islam has been part of our history. Even locally, we're very fortunate to have Muhammad Marmaduke Piktul, who converted to Islam and translated the entire Quran. And even when we have ISMC stores, it's that translation that we're often giving out. And on top of that, we have Lady Evelyn Cobbold, who was the first convert English woman to have completed Hajj and wrote extensively on her journey about entering Makkah and using her status as a Scottish aristocrat in meeting the new Saudi princes of the time. So there's a rich history that's very important, that this is a home for Muslims. And Islam isn't something foreign. I think we really need to embed that very clearly into the psyche of the indigenous community here, of the Brits, but also within our own psyche as well. It's beautiful to grow up in a community where our cultures are so vibrant, and particularly for me, being from my parents being from the subcontinent and being Bangladeshi, it's great that I can talk two languages and be able to have so much richness come from our culture. But also we have to also understand that a lot of our culture and a lot of our values and understandings and opportunities and challenges, which we'll be discussing later, are very much shared. If they really are not unique to Muslims, they really are not unique to our belief system. And like Imam Bashir said, unless we're around that table having those discussions, we're really not going to understand where it is that these shared and common values come in. And one of the things that Jo Cox, who was murdered just before the Brexit vote took place, Labour MP, she actually used her maiden speech in Parliament to talk about the fact that there's much more that unites us than divides us. And we really need to carry on and make sure that that is the work that we put into local communities. Julie mentioned that I facilitate the monthly Sisters Circle, and that's a chance for not just Muslim girls to get together, but there's a lot of faces here from other faiths who always regularly come to those sessions, and they're beneficial to all of us. I mean, Ban pretty much is our head recruiter and gets so many people around that table to come and just hear our issues, but also because the lessons and the teachings within Islam are actually very universal, and they can be very much applied to any form of our lives. Most recently we did a session on mental health and how it's important to get treatment, and how Islam actually openly talks about mental health issues and actually openly has prayers as well as narrations and lots of things just in terms of that understanding of mental health. So why is there a stigma? All of those things are what we've discussed. Previously we've discussed, is the Quran really violent? We do need those safe spaces. We absolutely need those safe spaces, and this is one today where we are going to create that. And I think what really, for me, stands out is the fact that we shouldn't really be looking so much to this glorious past. And I really hope that you guys can take some time later on to see the posters, our world, our hospitals, our scholars, our schools. And there's some amazing stuff that's happened in our past. But I do believe that the best is yet to come. I do think that in this room there are some amazing change makers. I do think that there are educators and imams and doctors and nurses and people who are contributing in such a rich and vibrant way. And like Suhaima said, I don't think that we need to be like, oh, look, these Muslim taxi drivers were taking people for free lifts after attacks had taken place. Look how good they are. That's not what it really should be about. It's about the fact that when it comes to moments of sadness and just sheer fear, when we come together and we don't allow that fear to divide us, that's the best of humanity. And each and every one of us has that. So I'm really proud to be a part of the Ipswich Suffolk Muslim Council, not just because we have these monthly sessions where we can get together, but also the fact that, you know, we are feeding the homeless every month, making sure that we have a slot during the Ipswich Soup Kitchen, and that is contributed to by many of the local Muslim businesses that donate food, don't expect any money at all, and we're feeding around 50 people that day to come and get a meal. And that really is nothing to do with it being about Islam and being about Muslim. It's about service. And I really think that's the main key message that I want us to walk away with today. How can I be of service? What does it mean to be a Muslim and be of service? Service isn't just about when we are serving our local mosques or serving the iftar meals, which we do during Ramadan. Service goes far beyond that. Service goes to the point of serving on your school council, or becoming a governor of a local school. Service should be beyond these religious labels. And I think what we can really discuss today is how, regardless of our faith backgrounds, how we can be of service and contribute and make sure that when we're in this world where fear seems to just continuously be coming at every direction, what's our contribution within that? Do we allow fear to divide us, or do we allow fear to unite us? Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.